Okay, my name's Alejandra. I'm going to be reading about moral distress in correctional nurses. It was a national survey and it's on nurses working in Italian correctional facilities. So it's basically looking at the concept of moral distress. Do you guys know what moral distress is? Okay, so moral distress is a negative sensation specifically to nursing. It's when a nurse is aware of a morally appropriate action but is not able to perform it because of institutional obstacles. So like lack of time, lack of support, medical power, and just any type of limits that may appear. There are also symptoms for moral distress. Do you guys know the symptoms?
No.
Would it be like stress in general?
It could be like stress. So if you're stressed, how do you feel?
Agitated.
Anger, you're frustrated, you may feel guilty, you may lose some self-esteem. You also may not have a loss of appetite, you might have palpitations, GI disorders, or a headache. So if you're feeling this way and you're feeling any type of moral distress, this is going to have a negative impact on the quality of the service you're providing for any career, but specifically for nursing. It's going to cause you to be emotionally detached from your work, which is pretty significant. So this study looks at the cause of nurses in correctional facilities feeling morally distressed. So what they did is they looked at 3 aspects that affect correctional nursing. Do you guys know what they are, or you guys have guesses?
Like the safety, could it be safety and violence?
What about the staff workers?
The staff workers. Okay, so it says the 3 aspects that affect correctional nursing is clinical, because it's carried out in a heterogeneous genus setting. And then also there's a stigma towards inmates, so that would be ethical. So it's clinical, ethical, and then organizational, which would be the safety issues. They considered like being a nurse in prison an atypical care. Do you guys have any like as to why? Like why would that be considered atypical? You're taking care of patients.
Because they're in that setting and you wouldn't really expect to be cared for that much if you're incarcerated.
Yeah. So there's that, and then also like organization constraints, like maybe you're not allowed to hold a patient's hand, stuff like that. So some things a nurse has to do, another reason why it's considered atypical is because you have a lot more on your plate. So you have to collaborate with other figures, you have to do outpatient care, specialized care, ER care, you have to give therapeutic education, you have to promote care, and you also have to look out for suicide, cardiac arrest, so things that are life-threatening that maybe you won't see as like a peds nurse unless you're like PICU. So stuff that's like intense, you're gonna see it regardless. So the purpose was to look at the moral distress as mentioned before. This was a cross-sectional survey. So what they did is they sent out a survey to nurses from 0 to 5, and they had to score like certain scenarios at either 0, no distress, or 5, which is maximal distress. So then the total score would add up from 0 to 100. So the higher the score means the higher the level of moral distress. And what I liked about this this article is that it did have p-values throughout, which lets us know the accuracy. So their dependent variable was moral distress, and their independent variable was overall experience of the nurses, experience in correctional nursing specifically, and the training they received. It was reviewed by the Internal Review Board of CIMSE ONLIS. So the first page of their survey was basically like informed consent, all that stuff, and their consent could be withdrawn at any moment. So the things they brought up 20 different topics that nurses rated on a scale of 0 to 5, like ignoring situations where patients have not been given adequate information for consent, ignoring situations where the privacy of patients is not protected, working with the nursing staff that's considered inadequate, perceiving little recognition or poor collaboration. There's a bunch of different ones, there's 20. So basically they had, I believe they had 238 nurses participate in the study out of 461 that received the survey. 111 were men, 127 were female. There was no significance between men or women for any of the results. The average amount of correctional experience was 6 years, with a person having 1 year of experience and someone else having 24 years of experience in the prison. Overall work experience was about 13 years. 179 of the participants had a BSN. 38 had a nursing diploma that they received at a hospital facility. And then 87 had something greater than a BSN, so like an MSN. Only one of the 238 had received a training on correctional medicine and pathologic addictions. 47 had received a training in a penitentiary nursing. And 108 out of the 238, which is almost half, had the intent of leaving correctional nursing, and that was the same between males and females. So what does this show? This shows that there obviously is an issue with nursing in the correctional facilities. So basically the overall results were that experiencing correctional nursing was associated with moral distress, and that there was no relationship between overall experience and training. But even though overall moral distress was considered just moderate, there are things to work on. One of the things they found interesting was that if they think of reduced prison experience, which is able to push the nurse to desire to change. So basically, if you're a nurse in a facility for a short amount of time, you would think like they're gonna work hard, right? Which is what happens, but then you would think they would continue to work like that. But in a prison environment, because of the characteristics, it does become burdensome for a nurse, so they end up abandoning it. And this may be because of the risky environments and other things. So from all the, how they gave 20 different scenarios, the ones that rated the highest were, the first one was perceiving little recognition and poor collaboration on part of the prison police personnel. So basically the nurses felt like their work wasn't being appreciated. Another one was thinking that they were working with a doctor or nurse who was not competent. That one was the highest. That was the one most people thought gave them the most distress. About 80% of nurses who stated they had that was ironic because 80% of nurses who stated they had not followed a specific prison training before taking service in that environment. So basically, you're expecting people to be competent, but they're not even receiving the training. So a possible outcome for that, something to change that, is just nurses receiving penitentiary training. For the nurses receiving no recognition, what they're suggesting is that nurses and prison staff work closely together and support one another. Another one that they found significant was working with the nursing and medical staff that I consider inadequate from a numerical point of view. So what's meant by that is maybe a nurse is dealing with too many patients, so then that's causing a decrease in the amount of time they're spending with the patient, and the level of care that they're giving is maybe not as satisfactory as they would like it to be. This is also because just nurses have all the stuff that they do so much, they carry so many loads, so many hats. So that might be leading to it. Because of this, they said that this could come into conflict with the care process, as well as working without resources and or tools to guarantee quality care. So if the nurses don't have the resources, how are they expected to give this quality care? And then it's these additional things that are adding up. 234 out of 238 nurses stated that working without resources and or tools to guarantee quality care caused distress for them. So that's something that we really need to look into, providing adequate tools, resources, whatever nurses need, just so they're able to provide the good care that they want to provide. So basically that was my study. I really like that it had p-values throughout, and I really like that they gave different scenarios, because you got to really see, like, maybe it's not the patient's background that's causing them distress, but it's rather like their own environment, like their coworkers, and then that's being radiated onto the patient. And that was my article. Do you guys have any questions?
Why do you think that the nurses thought that they were, like, their coworkers were incompetent?
I think they maybe thought they were incompetent. It could have been just because of the training. They just, maybe they had certain situations that they couldn't deal with. So then maybe it was like, I'm having a patient, I don't know how to deal with them. Maybe they're being very rough. So then I'm asking Andrea for help. So then that's taking away from Andrea's time with her patients. So then that's causing Andrea distress, because it's like, how does she not know how to do this? And now I have extra things to do on top of all the other things she needs to do. Like, what if her patient is having an MI? So she has to do that, and then on top of that, she has to help me too. So I think that's where it comes from. Just like, you already have a lot on your plate, and that's just kind of adding to it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so my article has to do with totally different, but it's still related to prison, which is our topic for our research project. So this article kind of explores the unique things that women that are pregnant and in prisons have to go through. So according to this article, there are over 2 million people that are in prison that are women. And it's interesting because the majority of these women are actually at a childbearing age, and 6% of these women are actually become pregnant or are pregnant while in prison. And yet there isn't any, I guess, standard or any regulation of what needs to be provided for them. So in this research study, they kind of, I guess what they found out is that over 46% of women that were in prison and pregnant did not receive any type of pregnancy care, so nothing extra. And then for those that were receiving care, I mean, they just had, prenatals, and they were transferred to hospitals if there were any complications, but there wasn't any like consistent treatment or plan, of course, across the different prisons that were used or investigated in. Let's see. Oh, it also brought up a pretty interesting point. So even though the outcome of women in so I guess the babies that were born from women in prison, their outcome, I guess, was lower. So I guess their health was lower. It was still higher than women that were outside of prison with the same already. Wait, how do I explain this? Okay, so if you're a minority and live a certain lifestyle, your pregnancy outcome is already pretty low. So if you were in prison and you were also a minority and your lifestyle was bad, your outcome was better. So pretty much it's better to be in prison than outside if you already have these things going against you. Let's see. And then some interventions that they suggested were definitely just kind of regulation throughout, just because there doesn't seem to be any pattern at all. And then also that more research needs to be conducted with this research topic because it's a growing concern yet no one's really addressing it. So maybe this is something we could throw into our own research because there isn't anything really out there. Is there any questions, concerns?
Do you think that the reason why the babies aren't making it is because of like the healthcare system in the jails?
But it's also interesting because they suggested that there's a lot of people out there that are free and not in prisons, and they're also not getting health care.
Right.
So there's just a health care dealing with pregnancy issues in general. So it's just something in general that has to be addressed.
Why do you think a lot of studies aren't being done?
Well, the article mentioned how there's no studies on women in jails at all, or like in general. But specifically this topic, because a lot of people well, okay, the way you become pregnant in prison, it's like you get there and you're pregnant, you know? And because that number is so small, people don't seem to really care, but at the end of the day, it's producing a child, and that's something that people tend to care more about, yet they're not really addressing it.
Yeah.
Comments, concerns? No?
I just think like there should be like.
It's just that.
Yeah, it is that.
It's just that.
Yeah, because where does a child go afterwards? Is
Yeah.
it wants to carry.
Oh yeah, there's like this whole, I should mention it, there's this whole topic, that the article also mentions, and it's just debating on whether the baby should be allowed to kind of be with the mother for a while or be taken away right away. And again, there's no regulation, so it just depends on the prison situation. So that's another research topic that has to be addressed eventually.
I can go next. So my article is called Sex and Gender Differences in Occupational Exposures and Work Outcomes Among Registered Nurses in Correctional Settings. So this article compares sex and gender differences in occupational exposures and work outcomes in these correctional settings. Do you guys think there's like differences between what a male nurse has to do and a female nurse has to do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Like maybe an example.
Well, I think it depends on the patients too, because some patients may not feel comfortable with
Mhm.
having a specific sex. So, and also depends like their cultural and religion. So.
That's true, some cultures. So the study found that addressing, so they're saying how there are differences between a male and female. Mostly it has to do with safety, because they see like more females are being harassed by the inmates, and what the problem is like, if we're not, the nurse is not feeling safe, then they're not going to perform
Yeah.
at their best expectation. So that's the problem, is like how do we give this good patient-centered care to patients, but it's also like their safety as well. And they also found that there's also quite a slight amount of bullying going on with nurses too. So then that holds them to be like, oh, why do I want to work here? That if I'm getting bullied here, it makes it more stress because there's more stress going on in prison.
So who's bullying them? Is it their coworkers?
Yeah,
Oh,
I know like the employees, like sometimes like
Yeah.
the officers. So they're finding that's going on right now. Another thing that I found as well is that most of them report that they have like high sharps and like sharp injuries. So like needles is a big thing. So then that's like also going back to safety. They're like, oh shoot, like we work here and this is going on, and how can we prevent that? Surprisingly, despite working in moderately to an extremely stressful work environment, some nurses reported positive job satisfaction with low intensity for their job. So then it's like, yeah, they're just like, they
Yeah.
want to do it, they're not here. But then, we think about these people who are in jails, they're like, oh, they're criminals, they're bad people, this bias that we create already. It's kind of like, why should I take care of this patient if they're hazardous, you're thinking like they should probably go to hell or whatever in
Yeah.
a negative aspect. Also, how they did this study, surveys were conducting this study. So they used a cross-sectional study, and then they asked like, oh, what do you see? Like, does an inmate harass you? They asked like a lot of like those kind of questions. They also asked like, do you work more in the morning or evening shifts? Because they saw like there's a correlation of, they're saying that female nurses tend to work more at the morning shift. I think probably because it's daylight, it's more officers, or there's more people there, and then males tend to work more at the night shift. Because they probably think that there's this stigmatized that men are the stronger or whatever, blah blah blah, and they can handle that shit. So this study is approved by the Institutional Review Board at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. But overall, like I said before, it's important to provide patient safety and quality of care among youths, because there are people too, and I feel like that's our roles as nurses, like provide the best care that we can. But then how can we hold that thoughts of like they're dangerous people as well. Also, they're saying how like they noticed that workplace training programs and strict reporting policies can reduce bullying behaviors and burnout of employees, because that's one thing too, you know, they're going through all this emotions and oh my god, and they have to learn all their patients, do like a brief history.
Yeah.
So, any questions?
Do you think that the reason why, or like going back to how you said that like coworkers are bullying other coworkers, do you think that has an impact on the way they deliver care?
I think so,
Yeah.
because it's like when you're getting an SBAR report and they tell you like, oh, they didn't do this to the patient, or that adds more stress. And it's kind of like when you see the person next time, you'll be like, oh, why didn't you tell me this? You'll have some anger against them.
Right.
So I know in yours you said that there was a small amount of nurses that wanted to quit, but in mine it said there was a large amount of nurses that wanted to quit, but my nurses were more related to like the bullying that was happening, or they weren't getting the respect they thought they deserved. So do you think that might be like what's causing like most of the distress in nurses? It's more like the peers.
Yeah, because you know, there's not a lot of funding going into like what you mentioned earlier. Like there's not enough funding going on into these like healthcare facilities that they have in prisons.
Yeah.
So they're like, we don't have the proper equipment, we're outdated, and it's like more stress on them.
Yeah, and like you said, like because of that, then I can provide the
Exactly.
best patient care possible.
You want to say?
I can. That's fine. Okay, so my article, it takes a different approach. It's kind of talking about how incarcerated patients would feel depending on like the way nurses talk to them, and it's just talking about like what they think would make them have like good patient care outcomes. And they mentioned that communication was one of the most like important things for them, and I feel like a lot of the nurses there, sometimes depending on the way they view things, it's more harder for them to, you know, respect patients. There are some nurses that still want to provide obviously the best care, but you know, there's gonna be nurses that don't really understand that and are gonna be biased. So yeah, the patients talked about the types of communication that they preferred, and the results revealed so yeah, the results revealed that they preferred like good communication, and that the nurses you know, like smiling at the patients obviously, and having the good eye contact, because I feel like, you know, like when you're like if there's people that are incarcerated, they don't really get that same respect that nurses do and that other patients do. So this study was collected, so it was approved by the Research of Ethics Committee, and there was a total of 347 respondents. And yeah, so they pretty much revealed that they preferred like good communication, and that would like enhance good patient outcomes. And so yeah, it was, the only bad thing about this study was that it was conducted in an all-male penitentiary, so it was kind of the views of just all males, so not female incarcerated patients weren't asked the questions. It was just the males, so maybe that could have an impact on the way that they prefer to be talked to, because it also depends like the sex of the nurses. Like what if some patients that are there just don't like to be smiled at because they're, you know, they could probably be angry for like why they're there. So yeah, and this did have some pretty good p-values. They revealed that again, that they preferred good communication. But yeah, I would say the limitations to this study was that it was just conducted with male patients, and I feel like this could be helpful in our study though, because it talks about like things that we can fix, because obviously every nurse is different. It's really important to provide patient care regardless of where they're getting the care. So just pretty much like using like professional language, smiling at them, and remembering like they're also patients. Like yeah, they're incarcerated, but they deserve to have equal care like other patients. And yeah, any questions?
I think it's just a good point, like, you know, providing the therapy.
Yeah, it takes a different approach.
I like the fact that they interviewed the prisoners, because I know all of ours were like, they're interviewing like the nurses.
The nurses, yeah, this is like the prisoner's point of view.
Yeah.
Do you think the results would have been different if it would have been females?
Yeah, I think so. I think it also depends like the type of crime they committed to. Because maybe, you know, some don't want to be there, or some
Yeah.
have been there for so long that they're used to like, hey, like I just want to be treated with respect.
Right.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely I think,
Or maybe they're not guilty.
yeah.
Maybe it was fake.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about my article. So my article was studied in Western Canada, and it studied one of the jails there. It was released in 2019, so it's fairly new. It was reviewed and it received approval through the Research Ethics Office, the University of the province in Canada, which I can't pronounce, but it starts with an S, and then the Ministry of Justice for Corrections and Policing, and the Research and Evidence-Based Excellence Branch. So all of those approved the article. And then before the nurses were given a questionnaire, they were asked, they were told what they were going to be doing to the results, and then they had the opportunity to ask questions. So the article talked about how nurses that work at like correctional facilities and jails, they have to use both knowledge and skills from occupational health, emergency room nursing, acute care nursing, community health nursing, maternity care, psychiatric care, geriatric, and end of life. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in just like one facility. Whereas like in a hospital per se, if you're working in the ER, you kind of know what to expect every day. Well, not every day, but like you kind of know what to expect on a regular basis. And here they're just including like every different types of skills working at a correctional facility. So basically, the nurses themselves said that working at a correctional facility is a unique nursing skill because it mixes working with the offenders, but also working with their employers, the community, and then their like future, because the nurses say that they feel like they play a huge role in how like the juveniles and how like the people, if they are released one day, they feel like they play a big impact on like how this person is going to be once they're released. And so I think one downside of this survey though is that it did only include 95 nurses, and I'm not exactly sure if that was because there was only 95 nurses available for that specific jail, or if that's the amount that the nurses that responded back. But I think it would have been more efficient if it would have included a greater variety of nurses that were able to respond. And so they were asked in the questionnaire about the difficulties in their roles, whether it's ethical, whether it's evidence-based practice, whether it's challenges in like the practice. And so they said that the very important thing that they thought was individual therapeutic interventions. So there was a higher number of respondents that said individual therapeutic intervention was the very most important thing that they can improve on in their care. So surprisingly, group and psychoeducation therapeutic interventions were rated not at all important. So I feel like the nurses in this specific setting value individual interventions versus like group interventions, or like just like they're valuing like individual care versus like group care. So they're kind of doing like the approach of like holistic care, looking at the patient as a whole. And so they were also asked about inmates with addiction issues, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and bloodborne infections, and these were the most important diseases that the nurses thought that they could treat. So more than 70% of the respondents said that these were the most important ones. And surprisingly, women, youth, and elderly, and chronically physically ill inmates were rated not at all important by a small number of respondents. And so throughout the survey, they just asked like about their experiences working in that correctional facility. So they also rated a very important was a suicide assessment, mental health assessment, and self-harm assessment. And I feel like that's really important to point out because a lot of times we hear that the majority of the population that are in jails are people that have mental health issues. So it's important that these nurses are actually considering that it's very important to assess their mental health and their self-harm. So it's over 80% of the respondents reported that this was part of their role, and they responded that it was one of the most important things that they can do when assessing a patient. So they were asked like, what can you do to fix like how like it's structured, what you can do to like be it more efficient. And so a lot of them said that they would prefer if there was like you can participate in actually like the workplace for more classes on professional development, self-development, telehealth, webinars, and personal work plans. So it can kind of like, it's more like nursing teaching where you can teach the nurses to work more on like themselves, because every nurse is gonna work different, and I feel like this jail specifically kind of expects all the nurses to work the same. So I feel like if everyone were to kind of, you know, go through like a educational plan where like everyone can kind of point out what they can change in their own care, they feel like that's more efficient. And they said that not a lot of nursing conferences are offered. So, and then a lot of them, 42% said they were actually not aware that they didn't know if they actually offered any nursing conferences, and 57% said that there's not a lot offered. So, it said only 32% had ever attended a conference on correctional nursing. So if, when they were asked if they would ever attend a conference on correctional nursing, 100% replied yes. So it's very important to, they value importance in like educating the nurses and how they change their quality of nursing. And that's basically it. Does anyone have any questions?
I mean, it's cool because it's saying how there's working in correctional facilities, so like unique and specialized, because they have no special treatment.
Exactly.
Or it's not even offered, so.
And then it's kind of like interesting because I feel like they let out a lot of their thoughts in this questionnaire, which is good because you know sometimes nurses can be afraid to like speak out, but I feel like when you give them stuff like this where they can actually like explain themselves, especially if it's like anonymous, I feel like they have more, they feel more comfortable, you know, talking about the problems that they see when they're in correctional facilities like this. So yeah.
I have more of like a comment. I just think it's interesting how it like kind of all overlaps. Like my article said like your nursing was unique because of all the stuff they had to do, and then yours says that as well. And then mine talked about how like the bullying situation that's occurring, like needs attention, and then Alex talked about that as well.
Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of starting to see factors that contribute to that.